what we were talking about on Monday with in chapter 4, and I think we got to about the point we were talking about granules and dust and so forth, but lots of different type of pesticides are formulated in granules. Um, Not many of them are used in spray type applications, but there's an awful lot of them are used in lawn type applications with weed and feed and things of that type that are customarily you'll see them advertised and promoted during this time of year. In those type products, you've got a granular type of structure that will generally have a herbicide impregnated on a soluble type of granule. Sometimes it's a herbicide and a fertilizer that is built into that type of granule, and most widely used on homeowners' lawns. They can be applied, as a broadcast type deal, or they can be done through a small type of applicator, either push or a manular type thing. So another example of a granule type thing is kitty litter. It's a formulated little particle that's used as kitty litter. And a lot of uses for kitty litter other than the actual designated use. A lot of folks will use it as a absorbent component, particularly if you get an oil spill. And quite often it's recommended to have kitty litter as a component of a hazardous materials kit or a hazmat type kit that you have in case you have a hazardous material spill because of the absorbent nature of the kitty litter. How many of you will, and it's not as common, I would imagine, in the area where you guys are at Southside, but it's a fair recommendation to carry a bag of kitty litter during the winter in the areas where we reside and to the west.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
It's snow, mud, or
Snow. Yeah. In case you get stuck in the snow, you can put a volume of that in front of or behind your tire, and it'll give additional traction because of the nature of that granule. So, and it's generally light. It's easy to handle. So.
I have no idea.
What?
Kitty litter and some mud,
I don't know.
in the driveway.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Kitty litter in the mud in your driveway, it'll absorb some of the moisture, but you're probably going to end up with like a goopy paste. Yeah.
It'll be kind of gluey.
Yeah, gluey. That's a good paste. Yeah, because I did that underneath my Army Jeep. It kind of leaks. It dripped some oil, and I put some litter under there. And next thing you know, I've got this grayish white goopy paste there.
Is it easy to spray off?
No, I had to like shovel it out, and then it stuck to my shovel, and it's nasty. And you can still see where it was on the garage floor. If you have an old Army Jeep, put a piece of cardboard under it. Learn from my mistakes. Yeah. Because any old Jeep, it's going to leak. Any relatively new Jeep, it's going to leak. A tractor is going to leak.
Absolutely.
Just know it.
Especially if you put highway.
And usually it's from multiple locations. Ours will leak hydraulic fluid and oil and diesel fuel too. We'll get all sorts of leaks. So,
yes.
Jeff.
And then of course you drip grease from the fittings in the back too. So.
Yeah. All right. The next one that we talk about, next formulation is one pellets, and that can be abbreviated as a P or PS, and they're usually small to medium-sized particles. And examples in the pesticide nature would be slug pellets, and household would be some type of animal feed. How many of you know what I'm talking about with a slug? Sometimes people don't know what a slug is.
Got too many of them in my house.
You know.
They recommend it.
What, did he know what a slug was? I couldn't hear.
I say, yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. Have they ever presented a problem for you on any plants that you were growing?
Cabbage.
Cabbage, they will devour cabbage.
Yeah.
They can be a major problem to folks that are growing strawberries on plastic, on a commercial strawberry production. They'll get underneath the plastic and then they'll crawl out at night and eat either the leaves and or the strawberries. So, and they're a problem to handle. So there is a slug pellet that ready to use and no drift and simple. It's the problem with that commercial strawberry production. It takes a lot of it to rectify a problem that you've got. The next one that we talk about is a formulation called wettable powder. It's abbreviated WP or just a W. And that's an insoluble fine powder that forms a suspension when added to water. And a household example would be flour, and the one that they use here as an example, I don't really agree with. They use a sulfur 80% WP. I've never seen a wettable powder formulation of sulfur, but apparently there is one, or they wouldn't have used this. But there's a lot of different pesticides that in the past 30 to 40 years were formulated in wettable powders. A lot of the major fungicides that were used commercially on apples and peaches and particularly the tree fruits were formulated in wettable powders. And they became really popular in the mid 1950s through the 1980s. After that, they began to move away from wettable powders because of the hazards that the powders presented to the handler, the applicator, and the handler. The powder tends to be a little bit dusty, and as you're handling it, there's a potential hazard to the handler as you're weighing it and measuring it. Advantages are easy to store and transport. There's a minimal risk of absorption through the skin or eyes. But as I said, disadvantages, sometimes they're hard to weigh or measure. Not easy to mix. Sometimes, as I said, there's an inhalation hazard to the handler. And they will, because they are a suspension, if you put them in a tank of water, ready to beginning to apply it, that's going to require some sort of constant agitation because of the nature of it. They tend to will settle out. And some of the wettable powders can be abrasive to equipment, and they will leave a visible residue in most cases because they're formulated. Say a typical wettable powder will be a 50% WP. You've got 50% of it is active ingredient. The other 50% is inert, which is normally some sort of carrier that, like talc or flour or something of that type. So that's going to create a droplet on your apple or your grape or whatever it might be. Eggplant. If you use a wettable powder on an eggplant, you're going to have, where that application dried, you're going to have a series of droplets that show that residual carrier that's there. It's not generally viewed by the buying public as a positive. You like to have minimal residues in today's society because people are so anti-chemical. They don't want much of that stuff. The next one we talk about is a water dispersion granular. It's a WDG or a dry flowable. They are basically the same thing. And they are generally aggregated particles of a wettable powder, and they form a suspension when mixed in water. A household example that they use would be instant grits. I'm not a grits fan, so I don't know how that instant grit thing works. But anyway, advantages to the WDGs are they're easy to measure, clean up much easier than wettable powders, and a reduced risk of the exposure compared to the wettable powders. They still require constant agitation, can be abrasive, and again will leave a residue. All right, then we've got what we call soluble powders, or SP or WSP would be a water-soluble powder. And they are very fine or medium-sized solid particles that will dissolve in water and form a true suspension. A household example would be Kool-Aid, and there are a bunch of different chemical examples that would be a water-soluble powder. Advantages, since it goes into true solution, you don't have to have that constant agitation. It'll dissolve in there just like putting sugar in your tea. As long as you don't go too far with the sugar in the tea and have it settle out, you can sweeten your tea and never see any sugar residue in the bottom. It will dissolve in water. So, disadvantages of soluble powders are that they're very fine and can become airborne and pose an inhalation risk. There are not many soluble powders available to the chemical industry. There's just not many of them. They are using some of them, but they package them in another way. Talks about other formulations. And there is one that's pictured there, the little aluminum looking container. That was a formulation that was available a number of years ago. That container was used. That's actually a pill type thing. It looks a whole lot like, if any of you ever remember salvo tablets that were used in your washing machines. It's a size of a quarter and half-inch thick, and those pills would contain that's called phosfume, and it's a water enhanced product that was used for control of groundhogs. You could you can barely see the top of the cap on that, but it had a white plastic cap on it and it screwed down. You wanted to minimize the exposure of that thing to moisture, because if it got much moisture, it would begin to dissolve and activate. But those things were used if you had a groundhog problem in a soybean field or an apple orchard or anywhere. You'd go and try to locate both of the holes. You'd seal one hole off, and the other one you would hopefully have it would be somewhat vertical, and you throw 2 or 3 of those pills down in it and seal it off. And the way that worked, when water absorbed to that pill, it would release cyanide gas. The phosphoric acid in combination was mixed, and it caused the cyanide gas. And if you did it well, you'd never see the groundhog come out of that hole. He would succumb to that gas, and the hole would be sealed off. I'm sure the EPA has taken that one off the market. I haven't seen any of that stuff. I've used it. I've had it, and the stench from those pills was just unbelievable. It was a nasty product. The other little picture on the other side there shows little encapsulated packets. They're a lot like some of the components, or little things that you can use in your washing machine or your dishwasher. They'll have volume of chemical or soap in that, and a little packet will dissolve and provide the that. The next one that's listed here is a category called fumigants. And that's very much like what the word says. It's a fume. It is a gas or a vapor that may be formed by a liquid or a solid. Pesticide example is a soil fumigant, and a household example would be a mothball or moth flake. Fumigants are very specialized products. In the ag industry, there's a lot of fumigants used, but we're not aware of it. Most of the folks that use fumigants have specialized equipment, and most of your commercial strawberry production now is on fumigated land. They're using varieties of strawberry that are pretty sensitive to a lot of diseases, and they will put down black plastic with fumigants underneath the plastic. The plastic itself will seal that fumigant gas in the soil, and it will stay there in the soil for 2 to 3 weeks before it gradually disperses and breaks down. But the intention of the plastic is to contain the fumigant. Fumigants are generally toxic and widely toxic, and they there's another use for fumigants is to kill insects and undesirable critters in stored grain. Generally, it's a single treatment that's necessary. It's another word you can use instead of fumigant is a gas type treatment. A lot of the fumigants that have been used in the past were types of gases that you would not smell or see. They're clear. They're generally a liquid, and they're injected into the soil, and then they will form the gas. But because of the dangerous nature of them, they will impart a percentage of chloropicrin into that solution that's put in the soil. Any of you know what chloropicrin is? I'd be surprised if you did. It is actually tear gas, and they use that as an indicator. They mix it with the liquid that's going in, and they put that in so as if you begin to smell that tear gas or that nasty aroma, you know you've got a leak or a problem. So you need to address that. You don't need to continue to smell that stuff. But it will make your eyes water. I mean, it's ugly stuff. You smell it.
Yeah. Like the saying is gas. Like basic training how to get like a gas.
Yeah.
So it's like
You've been exposed to it. That's why I asked the question. Morning, Tyler.
Good morning. I'm in agony.
Why, you couldn't find your presents?
No, I wish. I slept wrong, and since about 7:30 this morning, I've had a terrible crick in my neck.
We can fix that.
You and Ryan Khalil.
It involves a little violence in the butt kick. You know, we
Yeah, I could believe it.
That's all right. That's all right. We're talking about fumigants at this point. So.
Don't pray that you'll potentially die, and if you have asthma, you're probably guaranteed to die.
The next formulation that we're talking about is a micro-encapsulated formulation, and that's got the abbreviation of an M. And this is a somewhat of a specialized type of formulation. It is generally a pesticide that is coated or manufactured in a time-release manner. It can be applied as a spray. A lot of the
Not until half the season, week 10, and then I mean, it's
What do you mean by a time release?
Well, that acetaminophen, whatever, that ibuprofen that you have, sometimes there is a time release type of that. It will be a capsule that will release over a period of time, extended period of time. Okay?
Games 3 weeks ago, and a week ago.
Sure.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay. We were talking about microencapsulated materials. It's been a number of years ago that was, we had a material that was extremely effective. Material, it was an insecticide called parathion. And parathion was widely used, but it was extremely toxic to the applicator and to the target. And they came to realize that they were going to take parathion off off the market because of that toxicity. So one of the manufacturers decided to work on the formulation, and they began to make what they called an encapsulated methylparathion, which, because of the encapsulation that they were doing, it reduced the toxicity of the parathion to the applicator, made it much safer. And in doing that, it became widely used, a tremendous insecticide for a lot of the tree fruits, pesticide, or the pesticides that were needed, particularly in peaches. A lot of methylparathion used in peaches, not so much in apples. But they came to realize that it was a horrible side effect to the application of that, because the microencapsulation, it was basically like a little capsule that had a volume of highly toxic material in it. And when you spray your peaches, your target would be the peach tree, but you get drift and so forth, and it would land on the clover and the dandelions that were on the orchard floor. Bees were coming and working that clover and dandelions, and they would pick up this microencapsulated particle, and they're taking it back to their hive. And unbeknownst to them, it created tremendous bee kills because of the secondary effect of that microencapsulation. There's not a lot of encapsulated materials used anymore. But it was a time release thing. But it didn't kill the bee when they brought it, but when he took it to the hive, it killed all the young bees and so forth that were feeding on that. So, but the coatings were, as an advantage, they were increased the safety to the applicator. They were easy to mix and handle. And the time release prolonged the effectiveness of it, and it reduced the volatility and the odor. But it increased the killing of bees, and because of the longevity of it, it was extended over a long period of time. Not much of that material used. The material was called PenCap M. It was a good material. It just had some flaws in the application process. One of the next ones that's listed here is a water-soluble packaging. Generally, that's a pre-measured volume of material that's in a little pouch that is water-soluble. Usually, you'll have a half a pound or a pound of the formulated pesticide that's in a little water-soluble baggie, so to speak. And you just, if you need a pound or half a pound of that, you toss that in the tank, and the spray water would.
Is that the thing you were warning us about one day that could turn into the snot thing?
Yeah. That one can get kind of snotty if you don't get it fully dissolved, and you put a surfactant or some other oil-based agent in there. It tends to glop it up a little bit. It's a pre-measured dose, and that they list it as an advantage. It can be a disadvantage. assume that you're, got an application that only requires a half a pound to mix in a tank, and that pre-measured package is a pound. And the little water soluble packages they're not destined to be handled much because the moisture from your fingertips will actually begin to degrade and break down that little baggie, so to speak. So if it depends on how they are measured or how they're allocated as to how well that works. As long as you're using the designated rate, if it fits your application, it is an advantage. If not, it can be a disadvantage. So, and it's an advantage is that it's a lot lower risk to the applicator. You don't have problems with that. Another one of the types of pesticide applications is what they call impregnates, and they are types of pesticides that have been impregnated on a some sort of delivery mechanism. Folks that deal with the animal industry are familiar with ear tags. Ear tags are quite often used to control flies. So there is a chemical that's been imparted into that ear tag, and you put the ear tag on the animal, and it, in theory, creates fly control for the faces of the animals.
Yeah,
Did you have a question?
they got similar things, little round yellow plastic things for humans, for mosquitoes.
Really?
Yeah.
I know that.
Oh,
I
and
know
they make a
those
little,
things you could like put on your
Yeah.
belt or pocket or.
yeah, or even a
whatever.
little wristband thing, so they do it for
Yeah.
you.
So that'd be kind of like the collars or collars.
Dog flea collar, same thing. Same thing.
All right, cool.
There's a lot of it. There was a thing that was out 40 or 50 years ago. It was called a shell fly strip, and it was a little wide.
Curly yellow thing.
Now, curly yellow thing is sticky. That's a trap. It's got glue on it, and it'll catch the flies. But this was a little, inch and a quarter, inch and a half wide thing. It was only a quarter of an inch thick. It fell in it, or we placed it in a little holder, and it would emit enough of a deterrent that it would deter flies and possibly, I don't know whether it killed them or not, but you never had any problems with those fly strips when you used them. I used them in a research project that I had going on at Tech to curtail mites, because I couldn't spray the trees that I was working with. I had them in a greenhouse, and I was using different pesticide applicators on them, and I didn't want to complicate my research with what I was doing. So, a household example they gave with the impregnate things were scented fishing lures, and I never thought about that, but I'm sure that's got some sort of chemical that's been imparted into the fishing lure. I've never used those, but
Scented fishing lure.
yeah. You use those, Tom?
No, I don't fish. I'm too ADD.
The best type of fishing is dynamite.
That's what I'm interested in. But no, we did a little bit of fishing this weekend on our camping trip. Got nothing.
It's probably not the best time of year.
Oh, no, it wasn't. It's more about killing time than anything.
Yep.
Kingfish.
Y'all go swimming?
Can't get some fish. Come on, Wes.
Did you go swimming in the water like people?
Yes. Yeah, we went
Better get
swimming.
to the lake.
Yep.
All right, it talks about animal systemics as another one, and that's a little bit what we were talking about with the flea collars. There are also materials that you use as a pour-on type, as opposed to the flea collar, and it's this front line that you apply to your dogs for fleas and ticks and so forth. That's a little droplet that you put on their back that is systemic. It gets down through the skin and then is transmitted through their system. And it lists a human example would be a nicotine patch for somebody that was trying to quit smoking. There's nicotine substitute that's on that patch, and it's a systemic thing that gets into your blood system and hopefully deters your craving for cigarettes. The advantages of the systemics are they're convenient, they're in pre-measured doses. Disadvantages were the limited uses and quite often the cost. They're pretty expensive. I mentioned the idea with the granules a while ago. That talks about the pesticide and fertilizer combinations. They are highly advertised during this time of the year. They say fall is the time to reseed and fertilize your lawn and put on the weed and feed and that type thing. So that's an example of that. One of the advantages that the combined products, it reduces application time, and sometimes they're less costly. Disadvantages: hard to calibrate equipment with those things. If you're using a push type spreader, it depends totally on how fast you walk. Because the faster you walk, the wider it spreads, and they're difficult to apply uniformly. I'm not a fan of those, but anyway. Another term that has created issue in semesters past, I can specifically remember one young lady that I had in class, and she was we were always had issue with her talking about tank mixes. And when we're talking of tank mixes, we're talking about an individual spray tank that we put in 2 or more pesticides and or fertilizers. We're mixing 2 things in a spray tank. An advantage of a tank mix is it saves time, labor, and fuel. Can reduce soil compaction because you don't go across the field as many times. Disadvantages: the materials can separate. There can be some situations when they're not compatible. Not all chemicals will mix together, and sometimes if they do mix, you may have secondary issues. The classic one that always comes to mind is the fact that when we were spraying apples, one of the first applications that we would use in a normal season would be an application of a very fine, highly refined oil, whether it be petroleum or mineral oil. We'll put 5 gallons of oil in a 500-gallon tank with 500 gallons of water. And that creates just an oil solution. We'd have to put an emulsifier in there to make sure the oil went into solution. We'd spray that on the trees. And that would make the trees actually look greasy. But there was another material that we would normally use right after that called Captan. And Captan and oil are not compatible. When used in close proximity to one another, they are what we call phytotoxic. In other words, they will burn the green foliage that is coming out. So you had to be cautious to make sure there was enough time between the application of the oil and the application of the Captan. And I have known of people trying to save time and money, and they've mixed the two together. And that was just like spraying fire on, because it would burn the leaves off the trees. So they were not compatible. The spray manual that we used to use for the orchards would have a list of probably, it was a chart that had probably 60 different materials on it in both directions in little squares. And generally, if you had a green square in that chart, it was compatible. If you had a yellow one, it was unknown. If you had red, it was known to be incompatible. As a general rule, majority of the things are compatible. In other words, they will mix together and perform in the manner which you desire. But if you got that red spot like the Captan and oil, it was a major problem. Now, the reason for the tank mix, for example, I've been spraying grapes for the last couple of weeks, and I'm putting on a fungicide And then I'm also putting on an insecticide. So if I was not able to tank mix those, I'd have to go through and spray my fungicide, and then when I got through, I'd have to come back and spray my insecticide. But by the fact that I can tank mix the two together, I can go through one time and accomplish the task. Saves time and labor and fuel, so it's a positive. Talks about compatibility, and that's what I was talking about with the oil and the Captan. It says, do not try to mix pesticides that are prohibitive by any of the labels. The label, Tyler's label is a law. The label will tell you if there are compatibility issues with any of these pesticides. So talks about a compatibility test in a jar. It says water, agitate well, the liquid, and it says you water and wettable pesticides, dry flowables could be added in the form of a slurry. You shake them up, and if they remain, then add the diluent, in other words, the liquid materials in there, and any emulsifiable concentrates should be added last. And you shake them up in this jar test to see if there's any incompatibility issues. And examples of incompatibility are visual. If you begin to see globs of coagulated material that look like, say, globs of butter, that's one of the terms that's used. If you have incompatibility issues, it butters out. In other words, all your chemical will become a glob and settle to the bottom. So that's one of the things that happens. Not many of the chemicals that we use commercially in agriculture today are incompatible, but there are a few.
I have a question. This goes back to what we were talking about on Monday, with how after you get done with a pesticide container, you have to stab a hole into it when you dispose of it.
Mm-hmm.
What are the same procedures or similar things for decommissioning a pesticide vehicle?
Pesticide, what do you mean by
A
pesticide?
vehicle that has a large tank or something on it that has to be decommissioned.
I've never known that happen.
So they just stay in use forever.
They pretty much stay in use until they begin to be rust out. I've seen some tanks that rusted to the point that they were not usable. But as far as anything like that, Tyler, I don't know. They're usually used until they're no longer functional. So you wouldn't have to go through a decommissioning situation with that.
Okay.
Okay. One of the next one that it talks about here is an adjuvant, and that's a material that's used to improve the action of a pesticide or change the characteristics. And we've got different types of adjuvants. They are compatibility agents, drift control, additives, emulsifiers, invert emulsions, pH modifiers and buffers, safeners, surfactants, and thickeners. The term surfactant is basically a short for what they say, a surface active agent. And they are used to improve the wetting properties of a chemical. And I'll give you an example. We talked about the slugs in your cabbage. Have you ever tried to spray cabbage with water?
Yes, to like wash it off, you mean? Like with a,
Well, if you just put water on a cabbage leaf, what does it do?
splashes back?
It just beads up and rolls off.
Yeah.
It's nearly impossible to wet a cabbage leaf with water alone.
No.
Okay? So if you're trying to spray cabbage to control cabbage lupins or cabbage worms, and you're just using 7 and water, you're not going to be very effective, because as you put that mixture on the cabbage, it's gonna just beat up and roll off. So you wanna put in what we call a surfactant, which will reduce the surface tension of that cabbage leaf and enable it to be wet. That surface active agent. And I'll be willing to bet that all of us have used some sort of surface active agent in an application other than pesticide applications. What am I talking about?
A leaf surfactants?
Yeah, well, what I'm getting at, taking away the idea of pesticide application. How many of you have ever washed a dish?
Yes.
Dish.
Yes, sir.
All right, dishwashing liquid is a surface active agent. It enables you to wet that dish so you can wash it and clean it. That's all we're talking about. It changes the property of the water to enable it to wet the structure that you want to put it. And cabbage leaves are the example I use every year because they're so hard to wet. But if you put some sort of surface active agent, and it's quite often it's nothing more than a soap. If you're having trouble killing weeds with Roundup, if you're using a 3-gallon sprayer and you put 3 ounces of Roundup in a 3-gallon sprayer and it's not killing the grass that you want to do, if the next time you do it, you go through and put about 2 squirts of Joy or Dawn or whatever dishwashing liquid you've got in there, it will improve the activity of the Roundup. And generally, Dawn and Ivory's Joy or whatever you've got is a lot cheaper than upping your rate on the Roundup. So that's one of the things that we talk about with that is they are surface active agents. And there are a lot of those. Sometimes they're called stickers or spreader stickers. And if you go to a farm store, there'll be 50 or 60 different brands of those, but quite often they're all the same type of chemical nature, just different names. Have I confused you adequately?
No.
Okay. Have you got any questions about what we're talking about? Because, a lot of terminology, a lot of verbiage in what we're doing, but I've tried to give you an example or a use for most of these terms, and there's a lot of junk, a lot of stuff in here. I know it is, and it's the adjuvant, surfactant. Those terms can be used interchangeably, and it can be a little confusing, but as long as you understand that those two things are not true pesticides, they are additives to improve the activity of a pesticide. And some pesticides require them. Some of them say you've got to put it in. At one time, Roundup didn't require on the label that you use an adjuvant, but they've come to the realization that Roundup is much more effective if you do that. If you're ever applying anything and you notice that your solution or your mixture is tending to beat up and run off, if you put some sort of adjuvant soap in there with it, it will greatly enhance the effectiveness of it. Questions, concerns, problems? Anybody, anything? Somebody whisper. What was that? Sticker? Sticker's another adjuvant. It's just one of the same types of words. What else, Carol? You got another one?
So,
All right.
as far as the surfactants go, Mr. the leaf surface picture. So you would use a surfactant on, would it help with cactuses, indoor cactus plants?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Um,
And you know, some of the bigger leafy, like the elephant ear plant, or the darker green big leaf type plants that are like indoor plants, have that.
Yeah. A rubber tree, for example, it's nearly impossible to wet a rubber tree plant.
Okay.
Same thing. You know, and all you gotta do, you know, if you've got a problem in it, and some of those, you'll have mealy bugs or scale.
Yeah, if their leaves are getting eaten or something.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
You can get some sort of insecticide that is recommended for that, and then put a little bit of a soap or spreader or sticker or adjuvant. Joy, or, you know, I don't know how many times I've had people to use Joy as a spreader sticker, and it works. I mean, it just all it does is, you know, if we're thinking of a cabbage leaf. When you spray water on a cabbage leaf, just water alone, it gets a big droplet and it just runs off. But if you put some of this Joy in the solution that you're going to spray on there, you're able to, that big droplet flattens out and it'll wet the side of that cabbage leaf. It will enable the material, the pesticide, to stay in contact with the leaf that you're trying to treat. That's all it does.
Thank you for letting us know that tip. That's a good tip.
And in today's society, there's the group of things that we call surface active agents, surfactants, or adjuvants. It has gotten enormous because we used to have primarily just alkaloid compounds that were just basically soap, like Joy, and now they have got some highly concentrated synthetic materials that are a whole lot like the material that you use to increase the appearance of your tires. Those and that term's escaping me right now, but there's a lot of different types of formulations of surfactants. Some of them are used at a rate of a quart per 100 gallons. Others are used at an ounce per 100 gallons, but they perform the same function. Those that are used at real low rates are a lot more expensive. Some of them will cost up towards $75 to $100 for a half a gallon, where the others are, you know, 15 or 20 bucks for a gallon. You know, and it varies with the rate and what you're doing. But all these guys that are doing Roundup Ready soybeans, I'm sure, are using some sort of surfactant in the formulations that they're putting on the soybeans or the corn to actively wet the weeds that they're attacking. It's another tool. That's all it is, just another tool to facilitate the application of these materials.
Yes, sir.
All right, any more questions? Amanda, you hadn't said anything today. Your turn in the barrel. No question, nothing in the barrel. You can hand it off to Rachel. You know what she'll say. She'll smile, turn red, and say nothing. I know what she'll do. Okay. Well, the last slide that is listed here says the end. Okay. That's the last one of those. So that finishes up that PowerPoint presentation on Chapter 4. But as you look through this, if you got questions, you know, don't hesitate to bring it up, and we'll put them in the bowl for Monday. Otherwise, you guys have a large weekend and behave yourself. If you can't win it, just put some adjuvant on it. Okay? Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Rachel?
What did you say?
All right.